Good morning, everyone. Let me just do some checks here on my sound. Okay, very good. Had to turn up the microphone there. Sorry about that. All right, I'm very excited this morning about the lecture title, 6 Points on Prayer, because the more that I've read and the more that I've studied over the years, I find this to be presented in the most religions as the most direct path to touching the divine. Ramakrishna definitely says that one can reach his enlightenment or her enlightenment through prayer. Jesus, of course, says it with no doubt. The contemplative nature of Buddhism endorses it. Certainly Islam, with their 5 times of prayer a day and beyond, also endorse it. And in just a lot of the general spiritual writings, I find so many little hints and nuggets of golden thought, really, to invite us into this practice, into this ideal, and to come to a knowledge, a working knowledge of a relationship with the divine that's prescient and evident in the way that we live, so that it really does change us as individuals and our experience of being and others' experience of our being in the world. So as usual, I want to start with a Hafiz poem, which in itself is worthy of a lecture, just a beautiful ideal. It's a poem called Cast All Votes for Dancing. I know the voice of depression still calls to you. I know those habits that can ruin your life still send their invitations to you. But you are with the friend now and look so much stronger. You can stay that way and even bloom. Keep squeezing drops of the sun from your prayers and work and music and from your companion's beautiful laughter. Keep squeezing drops of the sun from the sacred hands and glance of your beloved, and, my dear, from the most insignificant movements of your very own body. Learn to recognize the counterfeit coins that they may buy you a moment of pleasure, but then drag you for days like a broken man behind a farting camel. You are with the friend now. Learn what actions of yours delight him, what actions of yours bring freedom and love. Whenever you say God's name, dear pilgrim, my ears wish my head was missing so that they could finally kiss each other and applaud all of your nourishing wisdom. Oh, keep squeezing drops of the sun from your prayers and work and music, and from your companion's beautiful laughter, and from the most insignificant movements of your own holy body. Now, sweet one, be wise. Cast all of your votes for dancing. This beautiful call to knowing God, this beautiful poem about sitting in the presence of the divine and living in the divine. And know here he presents this practice of prayer, this practice of God, this practice of placing yourself before the beloved as the cure for depressions, as the cure for things that are bringing your life down, for that sense of meaninglessness, for that sense of boredom, for that sense of pain, or all of the different things that can assail the mind. This lecture today, these points on prayer, found actually in a book called The Way of the Pilgrim, which is a man trying to figure out what the teaching means that says pray without ceasing. And it's presented in that book in the exact same way. And you'll find a great deal of excitement and joy actually in the things that he outlines. There's a great deal of freedom in it. It's the freedom that everyone in the world, whether spiritual or not, is looking for. It's that freedom to think anything you want, that freedom to think, to be and do anything that you want, and still remain on the narrow path, still remain as, as an authentic human being, one who's not given over to selfishness and to narrow thoughts, but has a universal heart. In The Great Master, which is a wonderful book about the spiritual practices of the saint Sri Ramakrishna, it says, even when running after the various things of the world to become happy, man really feels that he has attained, what he has attained is a shadow without reality. Even when performing spiritual practices, japa and austerities, he feels in his heart of hearts that it can never be an adequate price for the attainment of the infinite Lord. And even when employing unsparingly all means and methods with the hope and faith of moving mountains by the sheer force of perseverance, he realizes that he has no power to move a straw. It is only then that he begins to cry aloud in the plaintive voice, "O thou protector, whoever and wherever you are, save me." And it is then that the Lord accepts his power of attorney. So it's a matter of looking squarely and honestly at life without the Spirit, at life without the deeper meanings of love, intelligence, and being manifesting all the time in us. It's that life of materialism where the ultimate question is always why? What? Can I eat and be filled with nothing in this world? Is everything that I do only there to be doomed to be done again, over and over in these cycles and circles? Make the bed, get in the bed, wash the dishes, dirty the dishes, go to work, come home from work, earn the money, spend the money. Circles and circles upon circles within circles. And life continuously going on and watching the body slowly decay, watching those things that we used to enjoy get farther and farther away from us as we can no longer easily ride the bike or hike the mountains or play in the beach, until finally we lay ourselves down at the end of life in the bed and wait for that time, for this life as we know it, to burn out like a candle. And in that process, that burning question deep within us is exactly what the Master is pointing to here in this discussion in the Great Master. Why? What for all of this? Is there really nothing to be accomplished? Is there really nothing that could have been done? Is there really nothing that matters? Any evidence of a life of 100 years seems to be gone a mere year or 10 years after the body goes. What is there that's left behind? I remember losing a very close friend during the AIDS crisis in San Francisco back in 1994, I think it was. His name was Jamie, actually. And after finding out that morning that he had passed away from his father, actually, I went to his house that morning to see him, and there was this old man carrying his stuff out of the house and putting it in a truck. And I was kind of confused by that because Jamie lived alone in a studio apartment. And so I went to the gate, and the man came over of his own accord, and he says, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Well, is Jamie here?" He said, "Oh, are you a friend of his?" And I said, "Yes." And he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "Jamie passed away last night in the middle of the night." Jamie was 27 years old. And I, at the time, was 27 years old. And it made a very deep impression on me to have watched Jamie live and die in the short time that I knew him. And in response to finding out about him dying, I walked up to this mountaintop, this hill right there. If you've been to San Francisco, you know it's the one right in the middle of the city. And I sat up there on a rock and I looked down on the neighborhood where Jamie lived. And everything was as it always had been. The stoplights were changing, the cars were moving, the pedestrians were bustling, the metro lines were operating. everybody going and doing exactly what they go and do. And the memory of Jamie had already closed. The flowers on the water had already closed over the space that had belonged to him, that was his. Within a week, his apartment would be rented. Where did 27 years of life go? What did it mean? What did it accomplish? And I wrote a poem about that and wondered in those days, what is this all about? Why do we suffer like this with apparently nothing to be gained from it? And so it brings us to that point that Ramakrishna is talking about here. When you're broken, when you have enough courage and boldness inside to face the reality of the meaninglessness of a material life, when you have the gumption to exercise that discernment and to see that you're just pushing nothingness around nothingness and life's meaning falls out flat, if you can bear to look at that, if you can bear to embrace that and to know that to be true and not to give up in despair, but to cry out to your own soul, to cry out to your own hope, to your own inner ideal, to the divine spark within you. Call out and say, wherever you are, whoever you are, if you exist, if there is a meaning, if there is love, if there is a point to this, save me, show me, pull me from this despair. We're going to chase after how that is done, how to prepare the heart, prepare the mind, and free the sense of self, the sense of soul, that sense of inspiration, the sense of life that's deep within us, that hope for meaning, that need for profundity, for depth, for something greater than the small and trivial things we get ourselves involved in. Our first point, our writer says, pray and think what you will. Your thoughts will be purified by prayer. Prayer will give you enlightenment of mind. It will remove and drive away all ill-judged thoughts. So this prayer that he's talking about from the way of the pilgrim is this constant repetition of the name of the beloved, the name of your beloved. And in this book, it was particular. It's for the name of Jesus. And the prayer was, Jesus, Son of God, have mercy on me. And he just went on repeating that and repeating that and repeating that and letting it sink deeper and deeper into his heart, understanding more and more the meaning of the words every time he repeated it. But it need not only be that name. God has many names, and all of them equally powerful, to invoke that presence of the divine, that infinite, that love unconditioned, that hope, that strength, that joy, that meaning in life. Whether that ideal in you is Buddha, or Rama, or Krishna, or Ramakrishna, or the Divine Mother, or even if it's just an ideal, something like love, or beauty, or forgiveness, or strength, all of these things that are names of the divine, names of the beloved. That book, The Cloud of Unknowing, says, choose the word that is your highest ideal and fill your mind with it constantly. Ramakrishna says, smiling, he says, a Muslim, while saying his prayer, shouted, "Oh Allah, oh Allah." Another person next to him said, "Oh, you're calling on Allah, that's all right. But why are you shouting like that? Don't you know that he hears the sound of the anklets on the feet of an ant? God can be seen. He is next to you. When the mind is united with God, one sees him very near in one's own heart. But you must remember one thing. The more you realize this unity, the farther your mind is withdrawn from this world." So it's a beautiful thing there. Our writer is saying, pray without ceasing. Place the idea of your highest ideal in your mind at all times and have it firmly established there, and think what you want to think around that ideal. Thinking of pure love, thinking of God, thinking of pure beauty, pure strength, pure integrity, pure authentic living. Knowing that is your highest ideal. will spread within the mind. It will purify your mind. And the more you come to understand the unity that all of that implies as it matures, as it ages like a fine wine of the mind, as it were, that as that matures and ages, you're changed, you're purified, you're set free. From what? From the things that our friend Hafiz mentioned, from that depression of life, from that anxiety of living, from that despair of meaninglessness. Those are the things that we will be pulled away from. Those are the things that will be inspired out of as our understanding of our nature increases, blooms, grows, spreads, becomes bigger than the container that holds it. In that is life. And our prayers, our friend of prayer is saying here, establish this thought of your highest ideal, the thought of the beloved, the thought of God, in your mind, and be free. It will set you free. It will set you free from the needs and desires and wants of the body and the mind. Thomas Merton, a famous Christian monk, writes in his book on contemplative prayer, in the prayer of the heart, we seek first of all the deepest ground of our identity in God. We seek to gain a direct existential grasp, a personal experience of the deepest truths of life and faith, finding ourselves in God's truth. Inner certainty depends on this purity. So this inner certainty, this knowing, this return to authentic living, to authentic being, it depends on this purity, that this remembrance of the divine, this repetition of the name of God, of the infinite, inspires within. He says that it will put you into a place where you can have a personal experience of these things. He says here to gain a direct existential grasp. So this idea of God, quite contrary to what we're all afraid of this old man in the sky being a defunct idea of smaller and naive minds, turns out to be something experienceable. Experienceable, is that a word? Yes. Turns out to be something graspable, something that actually affects you in what you might call at this point your real life, this life in the material world. That with just a little bit of practice, a little bit of investment, it's like studying quantum mechanics. If you are like me and know nothing about it, and you sit and read an article in the New York Times on the potentials of quantum mechanics, you're like, it takes more faith to believe in the things that quantum mechanics is teaching than it does to believe in any idea of God. There's no doubt about that. It's amazing, amazing things in there. So if you want to know, you can't just write it off because it seems to be beyond your understanding or beyond belief at this moment. You have to invest a little bit. In our case, take the name, take the prayer, and exercise it. Establish it in your mind for all times, and you'll come to know these realities. You'll come to understand these realities. You'll come to have a certainty and a strength in them. Just like if you want to know quantum physics, you've got to take a few years of your life and invest it in some education, in some pain of studying for those exams and passing them, of learning how the scientists got to where they're sitting when they say those incredible things, very much in the same way as the spiritual seeker does his practice, invests his life and time into understanding the teaching so that he can come to terms with those crazy things that the sages have said that are so far beyond our belief and our ability to understand. This idea of faith has always been a troublesome one because many times in our naivete, we think faith is simply taking on something without evidence, to believe something that can't be known, to just take as a reality something that can't be tested. And of course, that can't possibly be the idea of faith, because then we would be susceptible to anything. We would be able to believe anything. That's not a safe zone to be in. So Vimalananda, who was a disciple of Swami Vivekananda, one of the great sages out of Kolkata at the end of the last, 2 centuries ago now almost, he teaches something very important about faith. And I've read this many times, but it's such a beautiful idea of what faith really is. He says faith does not mean a sudden effervescence of sentimentalism. All right, so it's not just a sweet, sickeningly sweet feeling of love and happiness in the heart. It's not an ignoring all of the troubles and icing over it with a faith, with an I believe, so that you can just somehow forget all of things that you don't know and don't understand and just believe this happy moment. He says it's not that. It's not based on this bubbly, momentary, sentimental love or this excitable love of emotion. He says it's not that, and it's not a dazzling display of intellectual feats. So it's not even a matter of stacking thoughts together to make a point. It's not even grasping a philosophy to the point where you can blame everything to its appropriate aspect of your understanding, and then have faith to take another step forward because of that. It has nothing to do with that. He goes on to say faith has no concern with these passing shadows, which vanish away before the tremendous facts of life. It has nothing to do with those things. It has nothing to do with things that are temporary and small and bury your memory after your body passes away. It has nothing to do with those. He says it stands unmoved in the innermost depth of the heart as the one vital principle of all thought and action. Interesting. Look at that. It stands in the innermost depth of the heart. That's the area where you are. That very self, the thing that animates your thought and your body. He's saying faith is existing in this place. He says it has no concern with the passing shadows of what's going on out here. He says it has something to do with the bottleneck of where everything that's going on out here is being reported to. That self, the watcher within you who watches the mind, hears the thoughts, experiences the body. It's that where faith exists. He says it stands unmoved. So it's not frivolous and changing. It's not insecure and untrustworthy. It stands unmoved in the innermost depth of the heart as one vital principle of all thought and action in the midst of the varying destinies of earthly existence. So it's that rock in the stream around which everything is flowing, that unchanging you that has silently been there completely unnoticed by you for your entire life because of its quietness. The wallflower at the school dance is the one that never gets invited to dance. Why? Because he makes no effort to engage, no effort to express, to come out, to walk in to the environment with the motive of what and who he or she is. And so it's never heard. This part of you that has been dressed in a body, that has been entertained by a mind for this short period of an existence, that is where this faith resides. That is where this faith is the point and essence and principle of all thought and all action. So, where does it come from? It is the intuitive perception. An intuitive perception, because it can't quite be grasped as a thought. There are things beyond thought. There are things that the mind cannot conceive, that cannot contemplate, it cannot process, because they don't break into the components necessary for mind to grab onto them. So he's saying that this is where it exists. He says it is the intuitive perception of an eternal relation as an unchanging principle. It is an eternal relation. This is an interesting idea, a suggestion of another. An eternal relation with something which, by its overwhelming prominence, throws into shade the ever vanishing shows of the world and draws us away from it, diversified occupations, to a close touch with that permanent reality. So faith is this knowledge of something deep within that says to you, I'm not going to die. That's why I never think of it. I can't conceive of what it means. I can't conceive of me before a birth. I can't even hardly conceive of the idea of me being born. Where did all of this experience and mystery of me come from? This feeling of separateness that we have. The reason that we can never be filled by all the things we run after in this world. The reason that we always have to return from our parties and sit alone in the same state that we've always endured. that unchanging self, which is implied by all of this swirling material reality around it, that silent, unchanging space that can only be intuited by a close examination of the subtle facts of life, that I have always been I, though my body has continually changed, that I have always been I, though my mind is changing as fast as light in the moment. Where is that security? It's that intuitive understanding that there's a self unchanging and secure deep within that is both immortal and infinite. Two concepts that this world could not have taught us, and yet we know. Two concepts this world cannot demonstrate to us, and yet we know and understand. Deep within you is that intuitive knowledge that is as abundantly clear as your own breathing and thought of probably just as much. So it's an invitation to that, to go deep within, to repeat the name of the beloved, to come into touch with these subtler things of life, these things that take some concentration, that take some stillness, that take some real studenthood to listen to find, to hear. So he says, do this work, take that name of the Lord, sit in that quiet solitude, and come to this subtle knowledge of the important things, and be free. Think as you like. Now, the second point, he's going to expand it. He says, for number 2, pray and do what you will. Do anything that you want. Isn't that what all of us are looking for? Freedom to do whatever we want? At first, we think that's exactly how we talk about it. This idea of being free to do whatever I want. But the very fact that you're wanting is a bondage. The very fact that you're wanting is a command from something separate from yourself that's telling you what to do, when to eat, when to sleep, when to get up, when to go enjoy, what to eat, how often to eat, all of these things that we're running around taking care of the body and the moods of the mind. We're never free in that. So he says, pray, think of the divine, interact with this subtle notion of self, and do what you will. Your acts will be pleasing to God and useful and salutary to yourself. That by holding within you your highest ideal of love, being reminded through the incarnation or the avatar, or even just the idea or name of God. To establish that at the center, you can do whatever you want because it will inspire your authentic desires. It will inspire your authentic self. That's not tied to the body and its needs and limitations. That's not tied to mind with its circular changing moods and states of being and interpretation. But that you'll touch something before that, before those things, that will lead you into a life of manifesting love, that will lead you to a life of manifesting intelligence, that will lead you to the deepest appreciations of this marvelous experience of being, this existence that we have. Your acts will be pleasing to God because who is God? God is you at your very center. To love, that is God, and that's all that you've ever desired. Love in all of its myriad of colors and forms, shining and glistening and flashing all around us. We chase after it externally for our entire life because we haven't taken the time to develop this intuitive faith that knows that its only source is within, that all of its fulfillment is within, and it's not coming from the people, places, and things. Frequent prayer, whatever it may be about, does not remain fruitless because in it is the power of grace. For whosoever shall call in the name of the Lord will be saved, will be pulled up into this higher understanding, will be pulled out of this despair of materialism, this place of absolute lack of meaning. To have faith in this higher ideal, to have an interaction, to live your life as an exchange, to live your life as an interaction with this highest ideal within, will move you to actions that aren't driven by need and hunger, but will lead you to actions that are brought about by inspiration, by love, by heart. So he says, pray first and set your mind free. Pray second and set your body free. Set your actions free. In 1 John, in the Christian New Testament, in the 4th chapter, it says, we love because God first loved us. Because God is that love. He's the noun of love. He's the idea of love. He is that love itself. And that is what we think of when we think of God, not old men in white beards hanging down from clouds. We think of love, the highest expression of love, a love that needs no return, a love that's not marketplace love, a love that has no requirements on you, but a love that's only available when you open and accept it. You may have many people in your life that have loved you that you never knew that they loved you. And so you never got to know and enjoy the fruits of that love. And with the divine, it is the same. Deep within you is that seed. Deep within you is that divine love, which is the love that you smell, that you sense like a perfume after a beautiful woman has walked through the room. You look about, where is that wonderful smell coming from? And so it's that intuitive faith, smelling that perfume, knowing its existence, not seeing it in the room, but knowing that its presence is proven by the aroma. With that, we look, we go and find, we love because he first loved us. Whoever claims to love God, and there's many people these days claiming to love God, making all kinds of rules and kinds of statements and judgments about the world around them, who are claiming to love God. He says, but whoever claims to love God and yet has hate for his brother or sister is a liar. Very direct words. If you think you are a lover of God and you have hatred in your life for anyone, a brother or a sister around you, your love for God is a lie. It's untested and untouched. It has not touched who you are. You have not known your nature. Pray. Develop that inner relationship without ceasing. Constant prayer. Find what you have lied to yourself about. Find the reality of this divinity within you. For whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. If you can't even get your love to be practiced in the material world where everything is obvious and requires no intuition whatsoever, if you haven't learned to love here, how will you know anything about this ideal love that isn't manifested here? A love that isn't available in the world because it's pure love. It's the love you're chasing, not that mercantile love of constant exchange. You call me, I'll call you. You invite me to my party, I'll invite you to your party, or other way around. It's not that kind of love. God will keep calling if you never return the call. He'll keep writing if you never write back. He'll open the door of invitation even if you never accept it. That's the ideal of love. That is what we are after. That is the beauty of spiritual life, the crown of spiritual life. May I say, the point of life itself. So those who cannot love what they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. And he who has given us this command, anyone who loves God must also love their brother and sister. This is how you know that you are coming closer to God, is your ability to love without reason. Your ability to love in the face of poor treatment, injustice, being exploited and taken advantage of. It's this love within you that makes you strong and impervious to these temporary, changing, incomplete, falling away things around you that momentarily seem so utterly important and powerful, but in the end are dead dirt. Ramakrishna says, yes, one attains God through japam. Japam is the practice of repeating the name of God, exactly what we're talking about, taking the name of your ideal, holding that ideal in the mind, so that when you say the word, When you say love, or you say Jesus, or you say Buddha, the highest ideal comes to mind. The more you know and understand and learn about those characters, those incarnations, those manifestations of this highest ideal in the world, that everybody has remembered, spiritual and unspiritual, that history books have remembered, that were religious and not religious. Why? Because it is something that has nothing to do with religion and not religion, believing and not believing. It is the isness of yourself, the isness of who you are and what you are that we're looking for, that we're trying to understand, that we're trying to touch, that we're trying to fill our life with. And God, through Ramakrishna, is saying one attains God through repeating his name, by thinking about him constantly, by repeating the name of God secretly and in solitude. One receives divine grace. And what is this divine grace? It's the ability to believe in grace. It's the ability to believe that there exists a love that is so constant, so true, and so profound that it requires absolutely nothing from you. All you have to do is open to it. You don't even have to respond. That will happen of its own accord because it is your own song. It is your own poem that you are hearing deep within you. Yes, it gives you that faith, that ability to believe that there is a love transcendent to reason, transcendent to account balance, transcendent to your imperfection. It brings you to an understanding of that love and its existence deep within you, and brings you to the point of courage, of counting on it, and living a life inspired by it. That, as we see from the saints and sages of the world in history, are unbelievable, beautiful marks of a divine nature, serving humanity in the most beautiful of ways, and requiring nothing for it, not even the basics of what we get for doing a simple job, requiring nothing for it. Then comes his vision, Ramakrishna says. Yes, so when you've come to that place, repeating the name of God until you've let it fill you, then your vision is changed. You know how Jesus says constantly, for he who has eyes to see, let him see, or ears to hear, let him hear. These are those eyes and ears, those ones that are opened to an internal reality of an infinite love, of an infinite existence. To hear this and have a vision of your beloved in all that you're seeing, and its result is ecstatic. All the great sages, when they've come to this point of understanding and seeing, the body's response is a short-circuiting of the senses, an overwhelming inability to hold, to even contain the amount of joy, the amount of love and inspiration that is involved in this experience. Suppose there is a big piece of timber lying underwater and fastened to the land with a chain. By proceeding along that chain, link by link, you will at last touch that timber. That's his promise. What is the link that you're following? The chain? It's the continual repetition of the name of God within the mind. The repetition, the continuous thinking of your highest ideal. He says, keep that name going, and you'll be free from mind, you'll be free from the traps of action, and you will come upon the real thing. You'll come across the real thing, the divinity itself. Which brings us to our wayfaring pilgrim's third point, third command. Pray and do not labor much to conquer your passions by your own strength. That's a great deal of relief right there, because I think for most of us, our spiritual life is a constant struggle to overcome our passions, to control our body and our mind. And why is he telling us? He says, pray and do not labor much. How is that possible? Because if you're laboring much, your eyes are on the wrong thing. You're looking at your weaknesses and trying to overcome them. You will not be able to do that. You're looking at your shortcomings and trying to change them. You will not be able to do that. You have to put your eyes on the divine. And through that love, through that relationship, through that transcendence, you will be changed without changing yourself. because it's not on the strength of the body and its habits and the mind and its whirling cycles that truth that becomes manifest, that change manifests. It's not through those things. It's through this inner inspiration of love that change happens, that change is. So he says, pray and do not labor much at conquering your passions, because the prayer itself is the infection that will conquer your actions, that will conquer your passions. Prayer will destroy them in you, for greater is he. Now, why? This is cool. This is really nice. This is what brings it down to practical living. He says, why? He says, for greater is that, or he, that is in you than that is in the world. That's another teaching from John's letter in the Bible. It's like greater is that image of the beloved that is within you, that image of God that is you, that Sat Chit Ananda. Greater is that Sat Chit Ananda that is the seed of your existence within you than anything that is manifested to it in this seeming outside world. Greater is this love, this potential that sits in each and every living being. Greater is that than anything external to it, than anything outside. And through its awareness, through its celebration, through its dancing, like Hafiz talks about, that's where his poetic ideas come from, that inspiration, to know that spiritual life is but a dance, a play, a joy, a love. It's not a toiling and a burden. It's not the fear of punishment. It's not the escaping of a world. It's falling into an infinite love, falling into an infinite and immortal relationship. It's understanding the depth of a love that ties it all together in a oneness. Pray and do not labor much to conquer your passions by your own strength. The prayer will destroy them in you. For greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world, says the scripture. St. John Karpatsky teaches that if you have not the gift of self-control, do not cast down. Don't be depressed. That's what he's saying. If you're not a big person on self-control, if you're not very good at controlling your senses and your mind, he's saying don't be bothered by it. Don't be worn out by it. Why? He says don't be cast down, but know that requires what God requires of you is diligence in prayer, and that prayer will save you. So he's saying it's not not to pay attention and not to count ourselves according to our ability to win, our ability to control the mind, our ability to control the senses, and not to define ourselves by them, by taking on the judgments and the shames that we feel around that and being cast down, in his words. No, we keep our eyes off of those things by repeating the name of God within us. That becomes our attention. That becomes our focus. And we constantly fill our mind with our immortality, with our infinite strength, with our infinite manifestation of a love that comes from a well that has no limit. That's where change is drawn from, not from the senses, not from little achievements, victories, and things we can tick off on a spreadsheet in our behaviors and actions. Nothing comes from there. Everything comes from here. And it's time to take your eyes off of there and put it here within you. Find this strength in yourself. Find this infinity within yourself. Find this definition of God, which is within you. It's not some magical wispy being out there. It's you. It's the fundamental you, the you beyond body, the you beyond mind, the architect of what you call your body and mind. That is the you that we're filling our mind with. Swami Turiyananda says, my master, meaning Sri Ramakrishna, my master often urged us to practice. It is through the practice of the presence of God, which is one of the offshoots or one of the byproducts of repeating the name over and over. It is, in fact, the practice of the presence of God, the awareness of love in all things, everywhere, all the time. It is through the practice of the presence of God in the heart that we begin to feel the overwhelming love of God for us, that we begin to feel and understand that notion of the pure love. not the shadowed love of the world and material, but the pure love, untouched by the limitations of mind and body. He says it's that love that comes naturally. That when you think and ruminate on these things, it's that love that becomes naturally stirred and aroused within you. Practice, 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 meditate, meditate. These are the words of my master still ringing in my ears after all these years. Practice, practice, practice. It's continual prayer, prayer without ceasing. A prayer, a repetition of the name that is in your mind all day long, every day, naturally occurring after a few days' practice. And that naturally occurring after a few days' practice then becomes naturally materializing or manifesting of the pureness of that love that's within you. That's all that has to be done. There's no bigger secret. There's no hidden mystery here. It's very straightforward, very upfront and center. Keep the idea of God, your highest ideal, in your mind at all times by repeating that name, repeating that prayer, repeating that word, whatever it might be for you. And these things will come of their own accord because this is the nature of the universe. Because the nature of the universe is a direct manifestation of the nature of the beloved. That's how we come to know the divine. In the way of the pilgrim, the sages say that when you fall into sin, do not give way to depression. So when you find it difficult, when you aren't the person you want to be, when you can't do the things that your highest ideal is inspiring within you, he says, don't change your perspective. Don't take your ideas off of this wonderful party of love that's going on within. Don't take your eyes off of that and put it on your faults and on your failures. Don't do it, he says. But give yourself to prayer, and by it, recover your balance. So it's a practicality. It's not just going to be an escape mechanism, as many may accuse you of. Oh, you're just escaping to this ideal. No, it becomes a manifestation, and then it becomes a reality because it begins to manifest through you. And the way that the world bottlenecks here in the heart changes, and your understanding and experience of it changes because you've now become somebody who loves and somebody who assumes love and doesn't assume all of the betrayals of the world, but has a confidence and a strength within because you no longer need anything spoon-fed through the senses to you. Yes. So he says, give yourself to prayer, and by it, recover your balance. Right? So don't keep your eyes on shortcomings. Don't keep your eyes on your efforts. Don't keep your eyes on all of those things that change. Put your eyes on that which is not changing within you. That name of God, the presence of the beloved, that ideal of love. Go forward and think as you like, act as you like. And his number 4, pray and fear nothing. What an amazing state to be in. So Swami Vivekananda says fear is one of the earliest and first feelings. He says as soon as there's the sense of other in the universe, there is fear because we don't know this other. What is this other? That's why the only cure of fear is fear is unity. This knowing that there is only one without a second, and its nature is love, existence, and intelligence. So by knowing that, by ruminating on that, it fills us, and we come to know it through that experience of faith, through that experience of practice. It's manifested through the purification that happens by doing this practice. Again, we're going to go to the Bible for John, for 1 John. He says, let me finish. He says, pray and fear nothing. Fear no misfortunes. All right. So that's the fear born of wealth. If you're rich, you worry about losing it. You worry about it diminishing. And so you constantly have to work to maintain it. So fear no misfortunes. Don't fear the loss of the things that you've had or that you've attained. Fear no disasters. Don't be afraid of these things that can happen and wipe out a house, wipe out a home, wipe out a family, wipe out a car, wipe out a job. Do not fear those things. Why? Prayer will protect you and ward them off. Remember St. Peter, who had the little faith and was sinking. That story that I told a while back. The St. Peter, all the disciples were in a boat. I think it was the Sea of Galilee, and a big storm comes. There's huge waves, and the boat was going to sink. And they look out, and in the most astonishing story. Now, this is where it takes some faith. So I'm like, wow, what's going on here? To see Jesus walking on the water alongside of the boat because he had stayed behind on the shore, and everybody on the boat's like, oh my, they think that it's a ghost, which is more believable than a person walking on the water. So like, oh my God, they're terrified, except Peter. Peter says, if it's really you, then invite me to come down and join you. See, now that's someone who knew Jesus. He said, if you can do it, I know that you can make me do it. See, he understood the infinity of his highest ideal. He understood this strength, this interior prayer, so that when he saw something that he couldn't imagine, he wasn't afraid. He was like, take me forward, show me. And so he does. He steps out of the boat onto the water, and is walking toward Jesus. And he looks around, and when he sees the storm and sees the fact, oh my God, I'm standing on water, of course, it shakes his faith. Of course, he's like, oh, this can't be done. What's happening? And he begins to sink, and Jesus laughs and lifts out his hand and saves him and says, oh, you of little faith, right? We laughed about that in one lecture before. That to actually get out of the boat and walk on water, in Jesus' eyes, is still a small amount of faith. So whether you take that story as an account of fact or just an inspiring story, doesn't matter. It points to the same ideal. That if you have this faith, if you have done this prayer, if you have done it without ceasing, and this idea of love has begun to manifest in you, and this knowledge of your nature has begun to bloom within you, nothing is impossible. And because of that, there is no fear. You know the nature of love. Perfect love casts out fear, John says. There is no fear in love. But perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. Fear has to do with danger. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. So again, we don't look at our fear. We look at the love that cures fear. That love within that gives us an idea that we have a self that's beyond the reach of the body, a self that's beyond the reach of the mind, a self that's impervious to the changing nature of the universe, seemingly impossible from the perspective in the front, but through investigation becomes real, becomes a manifested reality, a description of what has always been, but has never been understood. In the complete works, Swami Vivekananda, who is a man of science, a man of the real world, as it were, very associate, very someone you can relate to. He says, someone asked him, what is the efficacy of prayer? What is this prayer? Is there anything to it? You can see it's ridiculed on the internet all the time. Prayer, my thoughts and prayers, Anytime there's a great disaster and the politicians all want to put out their phrase, our thoughts and prayers are with you. And then this chorus of the skeptics come in and says, oh, that's worthless. What's the value of prayers? And because they haven't ever seen someone who really prays. They haven't seen someone who actually repeats the name of the beloved. They haven't seen someone who actually loves their neighbors as they love themselves. They haven't actually seen what real thoughts and real prayers are capable of. Because spiritual people aren't willing to do the work to show that it might be shown, that it might be manifest. He says, by prayer, one's subtle powers are easily roused, and if consciously done, all desires may be fulfilled by it. So it brings about its fruit. It cannot help but be fruitful. All desires can be filled by it. Now, I suspect your desires change as you become filled with this ideal, and it might not be the desires of the world that you might have started with, but it might be the real desires that were inspiring your search in the world and your confusion for what you were looking for that becomes clear, and then you are filled with the knowledge that it's always been yours. So he says here, number 5, your 5th one, after praying and being afraid of nothing, he says, pray somehow or other. Only pray always and be disturbed by nothing. He says, do it however you can. Pray always. I don't care how you get to that point. Get there. If you have to carry around a string of beads and sit there and count those beads all day long, he says, do that. If you have to set your alarm, your Apple Watch alarm to ring every 90 seconds with the name of God, do that. If you have to put little pieces of paper, little Post-it notes all over your house with the name of God, do that. If you have to set a time aside for praying every hour on the hour, if you have to put red shoelaces in one shoe and blue ones in the other so that you're always brought to why you did that, this idea of God, do that. It doesn't matter how you do it, but desperately do it. Put your mind on God and find your way of repeating the name of God always, constantly, without fail. He's saying just find your way to do it. And be disturbed by nothing. Be joyful in spirit and peaceful. Prayer will arrange everything and teach you. My God, what is this thing called prayer? It will arrange everything and teach you. It will show you these inner secrets. It will give you these inner knowledges, these inner experiences, these inner understandings, these inner notions of the reality of this world that you were seemingly born into. Be joyful in spirit and peaceful. Prayer will arrange everything and teach you. Chrysostom and Mark say about the power of prayer. The first declares that prayer, even though it is offered by us who are full of sin, yet it cleanses us at once. The latter says to pray somehow is within our power, but to pray purely is the gift of grace. So he's saying here, he says, just come up, pray. It doesn't matter what condition you're in. You're always going to be less than perfect, as long as your I is associated with a named ego self, a body-mind self. You're never going to be perfect. So he says, don't bring that shame and that shortcoming into your prayer. That's not the point. The prayer is taking care of that. It cleanses you instantaneously. When the thought of God takes over the mind, all other thoughts are cleared away, and you're left with an objectivity and a clarity of seeing and understanding so that you act out of love, out of intelligence, and you never make a wrong step, they say of the sages. You never make a wrong step. So he's saying there, yes, you may be full of sin. You may be full of error, wrong thinking, wrong ideation. You may make a billion mistakes. The moment you utter the name of God, purity is in your mind. Stay in that purity and do it somehow, by any means possible. Get yourself to remember that name over and over and over again. And then he says that this is what's within your power. To do the prayer, to say the prayer, that's the power that's given to you. The quantity is given to you. God says, pray without ceasing. You can do that by any means you can come up with. Do it. And then the interesting thing he says here, so offer to God what is within your power to offer. Give him that constant prayer. And he says, bring to him at first just quantity, just doing it as much as possible. This is all that's in your power to do. Just do it. Just this rote repetition of a name, however you want to diminish it in your mind, just do it. He says, bring him first just quantity, which is within your power, and God will pour upon you the strength in your weakness to make it the real prayer, to make it a pure prayer, to give it the depth. He'll flesh it out as it goes on. So don't you worry about yourself. Don't you worry yourself about the stuff that you can't take care of. Your condition of mind, your condition of body, your history of samskaras, your karmic wheel that's run you over a dozen times. Those are things that are too big, and can't be changed in the moment. What can be changed in the moment is starting to pray. If you realize you're not praying, then just like Brother Lawrence, just start. Don't kick yourself around the block for failing. Don't be sorry that you didn't do it before. Don't diminish yourself because you've never done it before. That's not the point. If you realize you're not praying, if you realize you're not thinking of God, do it. And do it constantly. Every time you forget, just remember again and keep going. It took Brother Lawrence 14 years of that before he was able to manage that steady stream. And you read his own writings, The Practice of the Presence of God, and see what a wonder it was. And you'll understand where the pilgrim is getting all of these points from. So pray somehow, by any means, The quality and depth of it will grow as God pours himself into it. The master, Sri Ramakrishna, says when they came to a reservoir, the master said to M, "Look at these fish. Meditating on the formless God is like swimming joyfully like these fish in the ocean of bliss and consciousness. So make that like your life, this world that you're swimming through, these experiences that you're walking through from waking up to laying down. They're full of bliss and consciousness. Begin to recognize that. Begin to understand that. Put yourself in the middle of that and interpret the world differently by the love that is within you." Thomas Merton goes on to say, "Cultivate an attitude, an outlook of faith, openness, attention, reverence, expectation, supplication, trust, joy. All these finally permeate our being with love insofar as our living faith tells us we are in the presence of the divine, that we live in Christ, that in the Spirit of God we see God without seeing. We know him in unknowing." Why? Because he can't be held by the mind. He can't be held by the mind. This is transcendent to mind. It's the you before your thought, the you before your body. This is where we're going with this. This living faith tells us that we are in the presence of this God, whom we see without seeing and know without knowing. Faith is the bond that unites us to him in the Spirit, who gives us light and love. Light and love. Number 6, our last point on prayer. It is to be noted finally that if the time of your vigilance in prayer is prolonged, then naturally no time will be left not only for doing sinful actions, but even for thinking of them. So obviously, if the name of God is always going on in your mind and it's filled you with love and filled you with joy and filled you with peace and filled you with bliss and given you a security that's undaunted by any fears or failures, when this has happened, you're free because nothing else can come to you to attack you. You've filled the space with the divine. Sri Narada, in the Narada Bhakti Sutras, he says the practitioner achieves dispassion in a smooth and natural way. How can you describe your growth in your spiritual life as a smooth and natural way? It's not this forced, effort-based, ego-based, I'm going to win, I'm going to win, I'm going to win, I'm going to do this, I'm going to realize God, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. Those are fine for the zealous beginners. That'll take you through the first 5 or 8 years of your spiritual life. After that, you realize that you're nothing but an annoyance to yourself and to the people around you with that kind of energy. He says that your growth in spiritual life should be a smooth and natural effect. He says, let me give an example from the ordinary life of worldly-minded people. A man loves a woman. After a while, he is attracted by another woman and begins to love her, and he lets the first woman go. So she is wiped out of his mind smoothly and gently, without the feeling or want for her at all. So there's you a nice worldly example of what he's talking about. That as you fill your mind with your knowledge of the divine, with this intuitive understanding of this eternal relationship that you have with God, with this love, this seed of infinity within you, as that grows and your mind gets filled with the fruits of that experience, all of this nonsense in the world that has been dragging you down and causing your depressions and causing your anxieties begins to subside. There's no room for it anymore, because that thought of God is constantly being churned, constantly alive within you. And the rest of it falls away. Why? Because you've kept your eyes on the ideal and haven't been distracted by the failures and by the attempts and by the noise and the nonsense of what your ego self is. You'll find that peace and that tranquility. In The Cloud of Unknowing, which is a 14th century Christian book on meditation, it says, therefore I would abandon all things of which I can think. If you can conceive of it, abandon it. It's unreal. It's part of the changing. That's what Sri Ramakrishna says. If it changes, it's not real. So he's saying the same thing here. If I can think of it, I abandon it. I leave it behind and choose to subject my love to that thing which I cannot think. Why? For he may well be loved, but not thought. Only by love may he be gotten and held, but never by thought. You see, there's something transcendent to thought. Have you thought about that? There's a you before you think of you. Have you found that? Have you touched that? Have you been there? Is there a there to be? Or is it just the untrappable experience of being itself, the undefinable nature of living? He's saying there, abandon everything of which you can think, anything in this conceptual changing world. Hold on to that name of God, which is transcendent, which is beyond it. Because God can be loved, but he cannot be thought. You cannot conceive of him. You can't conceive of him. He may be gotten and held, but never by thought. Therefore, although it is good to think of his kindness, so it's good, of course, it's a positive to think of his kindness and his worthiness in particular. And though it is positive and it's part of contemplation, nevertheless, in this work, it should be torn down and forgotten. We're not looking for moods. We're not looking for tinglings of emotional sensation. We're not looking for feelings in the heart. That's not the goal and aim of this. That is not what's going to change you and what's going to bring you through this. When you see those things, don't be distracted by them. Don't put your attention on them. You're going for something that cannot be thought, something that has not a definable attribute that the mind can hold on to. God can't be found that way. So don't settle for that. Don't just think because I have this little tickle in the heart of my hearts while I'm sitting there meditating that I've achieved something. You may have, but it's not the something you're going for. It's something small along the way. So don't get caught up in it. If you feel that energy overtaking your body while you're meditating, that incredible urge, of inexplicable just joy or bliss, don't think that that's the thing. Don't become proud because your meditation is great in your eyes. Don't chalk it up as one of your spreadsheet checklists of spiritual accomplishments, because there are none until the one. Tear them down and forget them. You must step above it boldly. Go where no man has gone before. You have to be bold in this. You must step above it boldly, but gently, with a devout and pleasing stirring of love, and try to pierce that darkness of thinking that is above you. Strike at that thick cloud of unknowing with a sharp dart of longing love, and do not move from there for anything that changes. There's some very deep advice given right there. He says you must step above this thinking boldly, but gently, so it's not a forced thing. Remember, naturally and flowing from a stirring of love. That's what we're going for. With a devout and pleasing stirring of love. Devout means established, an insistence on yourself. This is holding you in your place. I'm doing the prayer. All the other things that are happening are the beloved. You are holding to the prayer. Strike at that thick cloud of unknowing, all that stuff that happens in the mind, all that judgment of self, all the ideas of what you could be doing, should be doing, ought to be doing, all the things you could have achieved, should have achieved, ought to have achieved. All of that nonsense of thought in the mind, you're going above it, shoot above it to something you can't target, but you can intuit, because everything in the mind is implicating it. Go for that with a gentle stirring of love, and be bold and strong, but gentle. Strike at that thick cloud of unknowing with a sharp dart of longing love. Isn't that what Sri Ramakrishna says? That longing is necessary. Where does that longing come? It comes from the courage to see the world as it is, to not believe the lies that are so abundant around us, that you're going to find that perfect partner, that you're going to find that perfect job, that you're going to accomplish some infinite immortal thing in the world that's going to preserve your name for posterity forever. It ain't going to happen, kids. It ain't going to happen. There is nothing there for you, because you are not of the nature of the body and mind. You are transcendent. You are all of this and more. And do not move from there for anything that changes. Do not let anything that's changing in nature distract you from this quest, from this ideal. Don't. So the way the pilgrim, he concludes, And so we will pray as often as we can. We shall consecrate our entire life, our whole life, to prayer. Even if it be subject to distractions to begin with, frequent practice of it will teach us attentiveness, will teach us quantity, will certainly lead us to quality. If you want to learn to do anything whatever well, you must do it as often as possible. You want to accomplish this. You want these tantalizing fruits of the Spirit, this joy, this inner peace, this love, this transcendent tranquility. Then pray often and constantly. Give yourself over to it. He says, consecrate your whole life with prayer. Ramakrishna, like Jesus, teaches us how to pray. The scene, it says, the devotees were seated in the room, looked at Ramakrishna as he began to chant the sweet name of the Divine Mother. So that's the beginning. Chanting the sweet name of your beloved, your highest ideal, the Divine Mother, if that's who it is, if that's how God has reached you. So it's putting the mind on the name, repeating the name, and that will have its own effect, which you can experiment and explore on your own. Began to chant the sweet name of the Divine Mother, and after the chanting, he began to pray. What was the need of prayer to a soul in constant communion with God? Ramakrishna never forgot about God. Ramakrishna was never unaware of the presence of the Divine Mother. That's what made him a saint. That's what made him an incarnation for many people of God, was his tenacity and strength of being in that constant state of the divine companion, the divine lover of God. So after chanting, he begins to pray, and the author is saying, what was the need of him to pray? He was in the constant communion with God. Why was he praying? He says, did he not rather want to teach us mortals how to pray? So he goes on to pray, and this is his prayer. Addressing the Divine Mother, he said, O Mother, I throw myself at your mercy. Right? So his very first thing is to become aware of the infinite nature of the love of God, that it's not a transactional love. He throws him down in front of that kind of love. He lets go of his self-image. He lets go of his ego. He lets go of his karma. He lets go of his samskaras. He just throws himself before the Mother. I throw myself on your mercy. I take shelter at your hallowed feet. That's that faith in the ability of that prayer to protect him from everything, as our writer shared with us. I take shelter at your hallowed feet. I do not want bodily comforts. He's letting go of the body. Letting go of the body. That's not who he is. That's not what this is about. He's going transcendent, going somewhere beyond that. I do not crave name and fame. It's not of the mind. It's not of the ego. It's not of that more subtle self of mind than body. It's neither of those. So you see in his first three things he's doing, he's throwing himself at the infinite love of God, the mercy of God, the ability of God to love in the face of no reason for love. I take shelter at your feet. I'm going to find my protection there. I'm going to find my forgiveness there. I'm going to find my self-worth there. I'm going to find me there. I do not want bodily comforts. I don't want name and fame. I do not seek the eight occult powers. So he's not even going after spiritual accomplishment. He's not even trying to be a monk or trying to be an incarnation or trying to be a saint or trying to be highly praised by all of his friends and all the other devotees. He's not concerned about spiritual achievement either. I do not seek the eight occult powers. Be gracious and grant that I may have pure love for you. Pure love. What is pure love? It's a love with no me in mind. A love that needs no payback, that's not keeping track of a record of wrongs or a record of rights. It's keeping track of nothing. It's loving. It's manifesting all the time, flowing. Give me a pure love for you, a love unsmitten by desire, which means a love free of bounds, free of requirements. You know, that it is the wholeness of the thing itself. There's not pieces to this. It can't be meted out little by little by little by little. This is the ultimate, the perfect, the full, the inspiring whole of divinity. untainted by any selfish ends. Why? Because to have a selfish end, you have to have a selfish lack. He's keeping his mind on his own infinity and need of nothing. That he's not anything within this changing dream. He is the tranquil, peaceful dreamer itself. Untainted by any selfish ends, a love craved by the devotees for the sake of love alone, just because love is beautiful, just because love is worthwhile. Nothing else is necessary, just because it's beautiful. And grant me the favor, O Mother, that I may not be deluded by thy world bewitching Maya, that I might not be distracted by things that I can think, like our writer warned us about, that we won't be pulled away by the things that change in this world, that we will remain anchored in that knowledge of self, that we might not be bewitched by all of this jealousy and anger and competition and accomplishment and all of these things, these meted out, measurable, lacking things that can never fill us up. That I might never be attached to the world, that I might never think that I belongs to this in any way whatsoever, because that's what happens when you go after the changing. You identify with it. Swami Prabhupada, one of his favorite things he used to laugh at is that a devotee had bought a brand new Mercedes one time and wanted it blessed, and so he brought it to the monastery for Swami to bless his Mercedes. And Swami was looking at the car, and of course, he did his duty and blessed the guy. And he said one of the things the guy said, he said, "Oh yes, if somebody scratches my Mercedes, I bleed." And Swami Prabhupada used to laugh at that. He thought that's the very definition of attachment. When someone scratches my Mercedes, I bleed. So don't have that kind of relationship with the world. Don't. This is one of Thakur's prayers, begging the mother. O Mother, there is no one but you who I want to call my own. I do not know how to worship. I am without austerity. I have neither devotion nor knowledge. So you see, when we go to God, it has nothing to do with who and what you are, with your accomplishments, with what you've gotten, what you're dragged with you, what your attachments are, what your conditions are, what your mind is. Nothing to do with it. You have nothing to bring to this table. Nothing. Nothing. If you think you can go into the shrine because you've been pure, because you've been true to your caste, or you've been true to your religion, or because you from your youth have honored your parents, none of that has anything to do with the love of God and has nothing to do with your interactions with the divine. It is all because of God's mercy, his grace, her grace, that is endless and without measure. Be gracious, Mother, and out of your infinite mercy, so he's ending where he started, out of your infinite mercy, grant me love for your lotus feet. Every word of this prayer, the gospel says, was uttered from the depths of his soul. Stirred the minds of the devotees, the melody of his voice and the childlike simplicity of his face touched their hearts very deeply. May your prayer, may my prayer, may our prayers one day be described in the same way, that we touched hearts very deeply.